She was never meant to be queen. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, born in April 1926, was just a little girl the family called Lilibet. Her early world was simple for a royal child: nursery rooms filled with books, afternoons playing with her corgis, and lessons taught privately inside the palace walls. No one, not even her parents, believed she would one day carry the crown. At that time, her father, known as the Duke of York, was only the second son of King George V. The throne seemed far beyond his reach, and even further from his daughter's future. Life for young Elizabeth appeared destined to remain quiet, a life of comfort but not the heavy burden of monarchy. London between the wars felt steady on the surface, though shadows of unrest grew in Europe. Inside the royal household, Elizabeth's days passed with ordinary joys of childhood: sketching, reading, riding ponies, and laughing with her sister Margaret. To the world, she was simply a shy, bright-eyed little princess. But fate can turn swiftly. In 1936, her uncle, King Edward VIII, stunned the nation. Choosing love over duty, he abdicated the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. His decision sent shockwaves through Britain and shook the very foundation of the monarchy. Overnight, Elizabeth's father, the quiet Duke of York, was thrust into kingship as King George VI. It was a role he never sought, burdened by his painful struggle with a stammer and his own self-doubt. And with that one historic choice, everything changed for Elizabeth too. At just 10 years old, she was no longer a princess in the background. She became the direct heir to the British throne. Childhood games slowly gave way to lessons of state, training in diplomacy and rehearsals of composure. Tutors reminded her that every smile, every step, every word spoken in public mattered. She watched her father wrestle with his stammer, determined to give his people courage through speeches on the radio. From him, Elizabeth learned resilience, that true leadership is not about perfection, but about showing strength through weakness. From that moment, destiny was written. The little girl, nicknamed Lilibet, would no longer belong only to her family; she now belonged to history. When war broke out in 1939, Elizabeth was just 13. The world she knew changed overnight. The palace windows were blacked out. Sirens wailed across London and bombs fell from the sky. The royal family stayed in Britain even as many urged them to flee. Her father, King George VI, insisted, "The children will not go without me, and I will not go without the king." It was a decision that won the people's hearts. Elizabeth, though young, was not hidden away. She and her sister Margaret gave their first radio, broadcast in 1940, speaking directly to evacuated children separated from their families. In a calm but steady voice, Elizabeth said, "We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen." For the first time, the people heard their future queen. As the Blitz raged on, Elizabeth trained as a driver and mechanic in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. She learned how to repair engines, change tires, and drive military vehicles. At just 18, the heir to the throne was working shoulder to shoulder with ordinary women in uniform. Those years shaped her forever. She saw courage, loss, and resilience not from behind palace walls, but among the people. The war had forged her character. By the time peace returned in 1945, Britain had not only seen Elizabeth as a princess, but as a leader in the making. After the war, Elizabeth was no longer just Britain's future. She was its hope. At age 21, she delivered a powerful speech on her birthday in Cape Town, declaring, "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." It was a promise she would keep for the rest of her life. But even as duty weighed on her, love found its way. During the war, she had exchanged letters with a young naval officer, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Tall, confident, and full of energy, Philip captured her heart. Despite concerns within the royal family about his foreign roots, Elizabeth was determined. Their bond was unshakable. In 1947, at just 21 years old, Elizabeth married Philip in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was broadcast on radio and marked a rare moment of joy for a nation still recovering from the devastation of war. Crowds lined the streets, cheering as the young couple waved from the balcony. Together, they began a family. Charles, their first son, was born in 1948. Anne followed in 1950, then Andrew in 1960, and Edward in 1964. Balancing motherhood and duty was never easy for Elizabeth. Unlike most mothers, she often had to leave her children to fulfill royal obligations. Yet she cherished family life, capturing moments of warmth with her children at Balmoral Castle, Sandringham, and Windsor. Philip was her rock, outspoken, sometimes controversial but always loyal. He supported her through public life, walking one step behind but standing as her equal in private. Their marriage, tested by duty and distance, endured for more than 70 years, one of the longest royal partnerships in history. In February 1952, while on a royal tour of Kenya, Elizabeth received life-changing news. Her beloved father, King George VI, had died in his sleep. At just 25 years old, the young princess was now Queen Elizabeth II. There was no time to grieve in private. Duty called immediately, and she returned to Britain as monarch. The sudden shift was overwhelming. She had been a daughter mourning her father one moment, and the head of the world's most famous monarchy the next. Yet with quiet strength, she stepped into the role with grace far beyond her years. Her coronation in 1953 was a moment the world would never forget. For the first time in history, the ceremony was broadcast live on television. Millions across Britain and the Commonwealth crowded around black and white screens to witness the sacred ritual inside Westminster Abbey. They saw the crown lowered onto her head and heard the choir echo through the ancient walls as a new era began. To many, she became not just a monarch, but a symbol of renewal. Britain was emerging from the hardship of war, and Elizabeth represented youth, stability, and hope. She took her first steps as queen with confidence, meeting prime ministers, greeting foreign leaders, and dedicating herself to the service she had promised years before. But the crown was heavy. Behind the regal smiles were long hours of briefings, state papers, and endless ceremonies. Every decision was scrutinized, every word recorded, every gesture judged. The world was watching, and Elizabeth, barely in her mid-20s, had to prove she was ready. Still, she did not falter. The young queen grew into her role quickly, turning uncertainty into authority. In her calm presence, the people found reassurance. And in her, Britain found its queen. Being queen was never just about ceremony. Behind the polished image of crowns and carriages, Elizabeth faced storms that shook both her family and her reign. Decade after decade, controversies tested the monarchy. The 1980s and 1990s were especially turbulent. The most painful chapter came from within her own household, the troubled marriage of her son, Prince Charles, and Princess Diana. Their fairy tale wedding in 1981 had captured the world's imagination. Yet behind the palace walls, the marriage crumbled. Public scandals, infidelity, and bitter press coverage turned private pain into a global spectacle. The queen, known for her stoicism, remained silent in public, but the pressure was immense. When Diana and Charles divorced, it marked a low point for the royal family's image. The tragedy deepened in 1997 when Diana died in a car crash in Paris. The nation plunged into grief, and the monarchy was accused of being out of touch. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace demanding answers. For the first time in her reign, Elizabeth's silence was seen as cold. But then, in a rare broadcast, she spoke directly to the nation. With sincerity, she called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being, and expressed both her admiration and sorrow. That moment softened public anger and reminded Britain of the Queen's humanity. Scandals did not end there. In later years, controversies involving other members of the family, including Prince Andrew's associations, brought renewed criticism. Each time, the Queen had to balance loyalty to her family with her duty to the institution she represented. Through it all, Elizabeth remained unshaken. Her calm presence, even during the harshest storms, became her greatest strength. To the people, she was not perfect, but she was constant. And in a world where change never stopped, constancy itself was power. 70 years on the throne, no monarch in British history had reigned longer. Queen Elizabeth II became not just a sovereign, but a living bridge across generations. From Winston Churchill in the 1950s to Liz Truss in 2022, she worked with more than a dozen prime ministers, each with their own vision, but all united by the Queen's steady hand. Through wars, recessions, cultural revolutions, and the rise of technology, Elizabeth remained constant. She adapted with quiet grace, embracing televised addresses, global tours, and even digital platforms later in life. At every Christmas broadcast, her voice reached millions, offering comfort in times of crisis and gratitude in times of peace. She was more than Britain's monarch. She was the head of the Commonwealth, linking over 50 nations across the globe. To some, she was a symbol of tradition. To others, a figure of unity who kept diverse countries connected under a shared history. Her presence reminded people that while governments changed, the crown endured. As she grew older, Elizabeth became a grandmother figure not just to her family, but to the nation. Her calm presence during the COVID-19 pandemic, when she reassured the nation that we will meet again, touched hearts worldwide. In moments of fear and uncertainty, her words carried the weight of reassurance. Her legacy was not without flaws, but it was undeniable. She proved that monarchy in the modern world could survive by adapting, enduring, and standing as a symbol above politics. In her, Britain saw continuity, and in her reign, the world saw history unfold. On September 8, 2022, the news the world had long feared finally came. Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. She was 96 years old and had reigned for more than 70 years. The longest-serving monarch in British history was gone. Across Britain, bells tolled, flags were lowered to half-mast, and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace in stunned silence. For many, she had been the only monarch they had ever known. Her death was not just the end of a reign, it was the end of an era. Leaders from around the globe paid tribute, remembering her wisdom, her dignity, and her unwavering sense of duty. In every corner of the Commonwealth, from Canada to Australia, from Africa to the Caribbean, people mourned a woman who had been a constant presence through decades of change. Her funeral was one of the most watched events in history. Millions lined the streets of London, while billions around the world followed the solemn procession on television. As her coffin was carried through Westminster Abbey, the world said goodbye to a queen who had defined an age. But her story did not end with grief alone. In her son, now King Charles III, the monarchy continued. And in the memory of her people, Elizabeth remained not just a monarch, but a symbol of service, resilience, and grace. Her reign had begun with a promise, made at 21 years old, that her whole life, long or short, would be devoted to service. In the end, she kept that promise. And in keeping it, she became more than a queen. She became history.